Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of ECH Postgame Live. This one after a close 3-2 loss to the New Jersey Devils. And it's kind of a rare occurrence, it feels like, this season where the Kraken got goalied. It felt like Jacob Markstrom with a fantastic game in this one. Really two save of the year candidates in the third period as the Kraken put on a push like they always do. And this time they weren't able to break through. Markstrom was solid. The Devils defended the third period lead as maybe we should have figured they could, because I was on Locked On Devils this morning with our buddy Trey, who runs that show. And at the end of the show, he asked me, he said, hey, to pick which team's going to win. Are the Devils or the Kraken going to win? And I countered his question with a question of my own. I said, well, can the Devils hold a third period lead? Because I think that would give you the answer to that question, whether the Devils would win or not. And he said, yes, they can. They're apparently 19-0-1, well, now 20-0-1 when leading after two periods this season. And yeah, they're able to lock it down better than most teams. And they were again tonight, despite some really good chances from the Kraken in this one. Now, before I jump into chat, of course, I'll have to thank our sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, who sponsors all of these post-game live shows. And of course, with the Kraken going on the road, there is no better place to go watch those road games on the upcoming trip. I mean, hopefully a few easier games to be able to get some wins, right? Columbus, Detroit, Buffalo, some good games in there. So get out to Queen Anne Beer Hall, get a pretzel, get yourself a chopped cheese, and watch those Kraken road games. So now we turn to chat here, and we got a super chat to start this one off from Kraken fan. Hate to give other goalies credit, but Markstrom was a thief. And if anyone wants to blame this on Grew, needs their eyes checked. Yeah, Philip Grubauer was absolutely not the problem in this one. In fact, I think he was one of the biggest reasons the Kraken were able to stay in this one and keep it close. He made some 10-bell saves really in every single period of this game. And I know some people were pointing to the Paul Cotter goal toward the end of the second. That is a really tough one for a goalie to track, because he has to respect the cut to the middle. He has to respect, moving it around the net. And I don't know if Cotter meant to do that or not. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. But that is that one is a lot harder than it looks to stop there. It's just a tricky one. There's a reason that like Nikita Kucherov has that kind of shootout move where he'll set up a situation just like that to fool goalies. So yeah. And then on the other end, Jacob Markstrom was fantastic. This is maybe the best goaltending. It's got to be the best goaltending performance I've seen in person this season. He was excellent. But yeah, it feels like Kraken getting goalied is kind of a rare occurrence this season. It feels like this year, right? If the Kraken play well, they've tended to get rewarded for it on the scoreboard, right? The problem is just consistently playing well and doing the things they need to do to score. The times when they've been shut out, when they've been shut down by other teams, it's really when they haven't done much to generate offense or go to the net or anything like that. So a rare occurrence of the Kraken getting goalied tonight. Zoe here, cons, Burakovsky and Stevenson. Pros, I sat next to a very cute baby. Oh, that's a fun experience there. That good for you, Zoe. And yeah, the cons with Burakovsky and Stevenson, can't really argue on that one. I mean, we can get, we get into Stevenson a little bit. I see James saying Stevenson has to be the worst big moment face-off guy I've ever seen. Get him off the darn ice at the end there. I mean, the couple times I noticed him also earlier for clutch face-offs. I know he got tossed a couple times from the draw. Jared McCann comes in and wins those. So good on Jared McCann in those spots. But I mean, we talked plenty about Chandler Stevenson during the podcast today, doing our mid-season player reviews. And yeah, I mean, he's been pretty bad on that first goal for New Jersey. We've had a lot of rough plays from Chandler Stevenson this season, but that one might be among the worst that I've seen. Just that D-zone turnover absolutely can't happen. He's got time and space. He just doesn't move the puck. And then once it does get turned over, he's pretty lackadaisical getting back to the net front to try and stop it or do anything about it. So it's not good, guys. Lindsay, got to tip the hat to Markstrom. Absolutely. Zoe, I'd be a lot more mad if I didn't have free tickets tonight. Glad you got free tickets. And yeah, got to sit next to a very cute baby. That's good. I noticed that in the building, it was a little light tonight, a little light crowd. There were a lot of empty seats in this one. I'm surprised. I mean, I guess maybe not too surprising. East Coast opponent, Monday night game. But for a theme night, I was kind of surprised to see that. James, Maddie, and Shane lines looking elite. Poor Father Canner for being stuck on that Stevenson line. It's, we talked about it again plenty on the podcast on the deep dive today. I know it came out just this afternoon, so a lot of people probably haven't had the chance to listen to it, but you can trace a lot of the Kraken's forward problems kind of back to that. And hopefully I'd like to see them McCann kind of get rescued from that line. Jeremy Markstrom took his anger out from the Sharks on us. Maddie, Kakko, and Shane continue to look great. Yeah, Markstrom did have a rough, especially at the end of that game against San Jose. Winning goal goes off his glove with maybe 20 seconds to go. And so, he was motivated to have a bounce back game. He certainly did tonight. And then as for Maddie, Kakko, and Shane, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was impressed by the Shane right line, the chances they were able to get in this one, the ones that didn't convert. I mean, that Bjorkstrand chance in the first period, grade A chance Markstrom got a piece of. The Tolvanen one where he just got robbed. The first save of the year candidate from Markstrom. The passing on that was fantastic from Shane to set that up. I mean, if they keep playing like this, they're going to go in for him. Let's see. Mason, so what do we do with any winger we need to pair with Stevenson? I mean, Daniel Sprong worked out a little bit, kind of. I don't know. Vyren, Montour out there picking fights to get some darn rest. I know the Kraken have been leaning pretty heavily on Brandon Montour. I mean, he was everywhere in this game, and yeah, kind of picks out a fight there, helps stand up for his teammate, Chandler Stevenson. I mean, not Chandler, Jaden Schwartz. Sorry, getting saw a bunch of Stevenson in chat there. Jaden Schwartz after he gets cross-checked in the boards, but love seeing the response from the team on that one. He goes with, I believe, Brett Pesce, and they were jawing at each other afterwards too. Montour was really engaged in this game too. You could tell he was a little frustrated, I think, by things not going the Kraken's way. Hey there from Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Good to have you back here after you're here last game. I'm sure it's late for you again, but thank you for joining us here on Postgame Live. Maddie, just give him the Vezina now. I mean, certainly playing like this. Elbel, like the energy from the guys tonight. They played with much more heart than the past few games. I agree. And especially at the start of the game. This was a better start for the Kraken. Probably their best start to a game since the Christmas break. And I know that's something that they've kind of tried to emphasize a little bit here with the pattern of poor starts, but they did not start terribly like they had in the last few games. They were okay. And especially about halfway through the first period, they kind of figured things out and really probably deserved better than just the 1-1 score at the end of that. So I'm with you. I think the energy and the effort was better in this one for the Kraken. Christian loves Shane scoring the power play goal. Don't like the Kraken giving away response goals again and Markstrom doing Vezina things. Yeah, that power play goal from Shane Wright was awesome. I mean, give me more of that play. I love the high, low, high play. It's very basic. Like every team in the NHL basically runs it as part of their power play, but you just rarely see it from the Kraken, and they've run it to perfection twice in the last 3 games. So I want to see more of that. Teams are giving it to them. Just keep running it. It was awesome. Love seeing that. And the saucer pass from Kaapo Kakko on that was so pretty over Markstrom's stick. Love the playmaking ability from Kakko. Stratic, can we win just one Cryptid Cup, please? I know that have the Kraken ever won it? I feel like since it happened, have they not? I mean, I'll check in chat later. I'm sure you'll will tell me, but Vyren, at least this time he got goalied by a pass/plausible Vezina candidate instead of a struggling backup goalie. Yeah, I mean, the closest to getting goalied, I think, that I could remember just off the top of my head when I was thinking about it was maybe the Jonathan Quick Rangers game here earlier this season. And yeah, of course, he is the backup. So, this one felt a little bit more legitimate for sure, with Markstrom playing very well. Milo, we got Markstrom. Happy Pride Night, I guess. Groovy 2nd star. Good for him. I think he deserves that one. Super chat here from JTB Hockey. Kakko looking dominant. Love to see it. Get Burakovsky off the ice and make a move for Trevor Zegras. Let's bounce back and get some wins this week. We'll start with Kakko. Yeah, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but he's been looking great, exactly what the Kraken needed. And, some more moves like that for a player that fits for now and the future, I think could be beneficial. I don't know if Trevor Zegras is that guy, but at least someone with team control. If they want to do moves like that, I don't mind it, even though, things aren't looking great as far as playoff outlook for this season. But I wouldn't mind seeing some shakeups there. Vyren says, I don't know if they've won since the actual Cryptid Cup appeared, but they definitely beat the Devils in January year 2. The OT winner from Berkey. Yeah, that sounds right to me. Milo, please God, not Zegras. And then, yeah, staff seeing Kakko playing well was definitely a highlight for me. Certainly. I mean, he's one of the good bright spots that I think the Kraken can take out of this last run, as the Kakko's looked great. And they can keep giving him opportunities too. Bell have to come in the guys' discipline tonight. No work for the PK tonight. That's right. They didn't put the Devils on the power play, and that can be a dangerous power play unit as well. I want to praise them for that, and I will praise them for that. Although, unfortunately, it just adds to, I believe, that stat, right? That I think the Kraken have not won a game when they've taken exactly 0 penalties this season, which just kind of blows my mind. I feel like that shouldn't be, but definitely, I mean, credit to the discipline tonight, never going to the PK, because the Devils do have a dangerous power play. See Cinnamon Toast Crunch agreeing crazy saves to the goalie on another night. Those 2 chances would have gone in. We'd be leaving happy and satisfied. Exactly. Markstrom, aka freaking Jacques Plante. I know this is the Jacob Markstrom show here on Postgame so far. Onstad, that Stevenson line needs to be split up. I get that sentiment. I get where you're coming from. And I agree it's not good, but the problem is you have to then break up the Matty line or the Shane line probably. And I don't know that you want to do that, but I think at a certain point, I don't know, you just got to figure out a solution somewhere. But Dylan and I were talking about on the podcast too, like it's a ways out, but when Jordan Eberle comes back, I know Dylan kind of had the idea of going McCann and Eberle with Matty because that had worked in the past, and then try giving Stevenson, Kakko and Schwartz and see if that fixes things. But maybe even just trying it for 1 game wouldn't be the worst decision. See, lots of praise for Jacob Markstrom, and rightfully so. Mason to the Kraken hit 3 posts tonight. There was the one on the Kakko shot from the side. There was another one. I know at least 2, but yeah, I can't remember a third, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Cinnamon Toast Crunch. The wait for my first win goes on. We'll get there. I promise. Maddie, have patience. It'll happen. Via Ren, Nashville likes bad decisions in helping the Kraken. Can we convince them that Stevenson would help them? That would be a tough sell, even for a team that likes to help the Kraken like Nashville. I don't know. I don't know that you could do anything with that contract. Free McCann from the shackles of Steven Kovsky. Yeah, Sean, loving Kakko. I'm in my hoping the young guys just play well era, which really stinks halfway through a season. Yeah, it's tough that we're kind of at that point already, but at least the young guys are playing well. I was really encouraged by what I saw from Shane Wright also tonight. And in the first period, we noticed that they were putting Shane Wright's line out against the Devils' third line, kind of giving them those good matchups, especially with I think Dowling centering that line for New Jersey with Eric Holla out. That's a plus matchup for Shane Wright. And they were doing well. But then I noticed that there was a shift where Shane's line got put up against the Jack Hughes line. And that is a tough matchup. And it led to that Oliver Bjorkstrand chance that I can't believe it didn't go in, but it led to that grade A chance on the 3-on-1. And like the Shane Wright line won that matchup. And so that was great to see from him. And I kind of hope they just keep ramping it up a little bit, giving him more and more of a challenge and letting him go to work, because I think he did well in that tonight. Let's see. Aaron, I nearly threw my remote across the room after that response goal. How can this keep happening? It has been a bit of a theme for the Kraken here. And it's like, I don't know. I talked to Dylan about this too, because I was still getting the goal tweet out. And I was wondering, okay, what his opinion was kind of on the breakdown. And it looked like Palat just kind of found a soft spot in the zone and was able to kind of make it work from there. But the guys, like, they didn't leave a huge gap, but they were all just kind of, as Dylan said, standing up and not doing much. And Dylan is actually ready here. This might be a new record at the 14-minute mark as he kind of shrugs his arms here. And Dylan, can you hear me before I add you? Yeah, you got your credential on. Just want to give you the heads up on that before we add you. But Dylan is almost ready to go. So yeah, guessing this was a very short one here. As Dylan gets ready, just waiting for him to give me the thumbs up here. And he is good to go. So hello there, Dylan.
It was out of frame. It was out of frame.
Yeah, it was out of frame. Just to make sure, if you jumped up briefly or something.
Oh, yes, that common post-game occurrence for us, right?
Yeah, and maybe especially not after this. But Dylan, very short one here. I imagine not too much from the players and Dan,
by the way, I was just checked, by the way. So,
Okay, there you go.
Security, so.
We got to keep sending so they learn your face and they know you're here. They know me already, but they got to.
It's just funny because I just taken it off.
Of course.
But Sorry, what were you saying? I mean, just
Dan
talks
and the
about
players,
the
anything
Dan and the
notable?
players. I mean, look, they are getting us in and out of there fast these last couple games, right? Like it is extremely short. I feel like this was a record for a Dan presser, 3.5 minutes, and
Man,
that's like probably being generous with me, like starting the timer on my recorder early and then like ending the recording after he's already gotten up and starting to walk away. Um, just look, I mean, we talked about it last game, right? Game kind of speaking for itself. In this one, I feel like that was kind of the case. Lots of talk to both Jared McCann, Shane Wright, and Dan Bilesma about, look, this was a game where you had opportunities and you got goalied, right? Like we haven't talked about that too much this season, but do you feel optimistic about the chances that you got, right? It's one of the questions to Shane. Talking to Dan Bilesma, do you walk away from this feeling okay because you were able to get all of those good chances? And both from the players and from Dan, the idea was that yes, right? Like, you're doing things right. You're getting guys open and in close around the crease in a way that you haven't really been able to a lot this season. You were able to generate those chances, and that is a good thing. And you want to make sure that you take away those lessons from this game. And on the Dan side of things, you want to make sure that your team really understands that, look, they were doing the right thing, right? They weren't rewarded because you faced a goalie tonight who was playing out of his mind and was able to make huge saves. But you want to make sure that the guys feel like they were rewarded and they were able to get those big chances, even though they weren't able to put the puck in the back of the net, because this is the kind of game that you want them to play with, right? You want them to go out there and go to the net front. You want them to be making those passes to the back door and completing those opportunities. And so it's one of those where, on the coaching side of things, it's a little difficult because everybody, hey, they went out there and they did their job and they did everything that's supposed to lead to scoring. And boy, did it lead to a bunch of chances that probably should have ended up in the back of the net, but they didn't actually walk away with any of them. And so you gotta find a way of, finding other means to make the players feel good and validated for those decisions.
right, exactly. Even though on the scoreboard you look up it's a failure, you've got to make the players realize there are some successes in there. So super chat here from Zoe. Sorry it took a little while with Dylan coming on here, but we want Kako to like us. Don't stick him with the black hole named Stevie. I was telling everybody about what you mentioned on the podcast about when it is time for Everly to come back, maybe trying McCann and Everly with Maddie, and then seeing if Kako and Schwartz can kind of fix the Stevenson line. But Zoe, not a fan.
Yeah, I mean, I expressed that to you a little bit as well, right? Like watching this one, I want to see just to see if it would work, but at the same time, I was talking with you, Capo Caco, what he really does so well in the defensive zone, or at least what he's been able to do when he's on Maddie's wing, is he's able to go out there and he's really able to set up between the winger on his side and the defenseman for the other team, right? And he's able to take away that passing lane back to the point for these other teams, and that's really valuable. It's been working a lot. He's able to get a stick on the puck a lot in the defensive zone because that's normally the safety valve for all teams in the offensive zone, right? Just cycle it back to the point. If you're pressured down low, that's the place you can go. And so guys almost do it just out of muscle memory without even thinking about it. If they feel a body or a presence on them, they're just going to start sending it back there. And we've seen Capo Caco intercept a lot of those passes, or at least disrupt those passes, get a little bit on them so the pass isn't clean going back to the point. And I feel like that's helped a lot, kind of creating perimeter defense, and it's allowed Matty Beniers to focus a lot more on the interior defense, and he's really been able to take away a lot of really good centers these last couple of games by being able to just focus on that. He doesn't have to worry about the back end. He doesn't have to worry about the point at all because Capo Caco is kind of changing the way teams have to play back there on the outside. It's really allowed Matty to focus on something else and really zero in his defensive abilities onto the middle of the ice. And we're seeing a lot less kind of those high danger chances when that line is out there because of it. Do I think that same thing would be happening if Capo Caco was out there with Chandler Stevenson? Well, it's entirely possible that Capo Caco plays in that same spot and he is disrupting what the other team's defenseman is doing. Does that allow Chandler Stevenson to zero in on the other team's center or whoever's going to be playing on the interior there and really start taking them away? Maybe, right? Like it's one of those things like we probably won't know until it is tried. We know that Chandler Stevenson's net front defense and kind of slot defense is not great. We knew that before he signed here, right? That was like kind of the black hole for him in Vegas when he was there as well. If you look at any of the like shot charts or anything like that, like the Micah Blake McCurdy shot charts and stuff, we knew that this was an area of struggle for Chandler Stevenson. Would having Capo Caco taking away some of those perimeter plays and taking away the point help him to be better in those areas? I would love to say yes, but without seeing it, I just can't. But it means that I don't know that you get the same benefits of Capo Caco's defense out there as you're seeing right now with Matty Beniers, just because Matty Beniers is somebody who is able to really kind of, if one little thing gets taken off his plate, he's able to focus that much more and use those skills that he has. And I just don't know that Chandler Stevenson could replicate that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. As soon as you made that point to me in the press bridge, I thought, oh yeah, you know what? Maybe that wouldn't work out. And I like some of the reactions here to you joining Stratic. Dylan's like, that meeting could have been an email. Staff
literally the last question was asked to Dan, and it was just about the goals being scored kind of right after the Kraken score, and it was just, after you guys get the tie in there, does that take the wind out of your sails? And just final thing from Dan, yes. And then pause for a moment, and he got up and walked off. That was, so you know what? Yeah, it was very much could have been one of these, we could have just handled this on Slack moments.
Yeah, probably. It feels like, I mean, yeah, under 14 minutes is kind of crazy to get up here and join too. And then Steve asking, it's a good question. Why can't we see the credentials? Because I did mention that to you earlier. It's because, yeah, they attempt to, people can attempt to copy them if they're shown or have a picture of it. And yeah, Stratic, they don't want people to make even low res copies of the credentials. Yes. But better safe than sorry on that always. So just, trying to be safe about that. And then I see a conversation about ice time here for Shane Wright, 13:21 of ice time. And I think Stevenson had 18:53 tonight. At a certain point, they're going to have to get those numbers closer to each other, right?
I mean, we've been talking about it, right? Like, it is something that we're kind of waiting for. And I don't know when it's really going to happen. I personally think we're probably going to see that whenever this team presses the trade button, right? Whether they wait until the trade deadline or Ron gets busy with it over, and uses the Four Nations break or whatever to talk to other general managers and does something more in mid to late February, which would be more of Ron's style. But I think until that happens, and, they've made the move and they've kind of officially signaled where, this isn't going to happen this year, we're going to continue to see things this way because, in their minds, and I understand why as a team they have to have this mindset, they're still in it, right? There is still a chance. At any moment they can go on a run and they can potentially be in competition for one of those playoff spots. I think what we're slowly starting to see, and it started tonight as you and I talked about up on the press bridge, right? We are starting to see Shane get more and more, difficult matchups out there. Right? Like, his ice time's not necessarily increasing, but in these home games, we're starting to see him go out there against other teams, top lines. He's out there against Jack Hughes today, right? Like, that's something that, we weren't normally seeing. So in a lot of ways, they are starting to do that with Shane. They are starting to give him the tougher matchups. They are trying to increase that his workload in that way. But I don't know that we'll see really increased ice time until the team's just done.
Right. It's gonna be a point where they kind of make a wholesale decision, I think. And that point hasn't happened yet, but that's kind of when it would be. I'm with you on that. And super chat here from Jules. Thank you, Jules. As a security supervisor now, I thank you for not showing the creds, as that's an issue we have faced at crypto. Yeah, no, we definitely, we've heard kind of the horror stories from it in different places. So we always try and be careful about it. But back to the Stevenson conversation, because a lot of people I see in chat there, we are talking a lot about Chandler Stevenson, but as Brooke says, I really don't think Stevenson is a bad player. He's doing exactly what he's always done. It's producing assists. Burakovsky, on the other hand, and say Kylie, I still feel Berkey is worse. And I see the conversation basically about, on stop Berkey is literally a liability to send over the boards. Sergey, we're pushing everything on Stevie, which is fine, but watch Burakovsky. Just count every time he enters the zone and loses the puck immediately and being smushed into the boards, period. Then he changes. I don't mean to take anything away from Andre Burakovsky, because he's also not playing all that great right now. Unfortunately, didn't convert on a breakaway he had in the first period, but he was getting chances early on. But again, as this game went on, it was kind of same old Berkey, it felt like.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, congrats, Jules, on the promotion. It sounds like there, based on the wording at the beginning of the super chat, is security supervisor now. So congrats on
Oh
that.
yeah, sorry, congrats, Jules.
If
I'm
that's
sorry
the
how I
case
missed that
there.
in the wording. Sorry about that.
Look, both guys have struggled this year, right? Like, this is no secret. We talked about it earlier today on the deep dive when we were doing the player reviews. If you sort any of the metrics that, are kind of the metrics that tell you how well players have been performing out there, expected goals share and percentage there, or if you're looking at, I like to look at the high danger chances and the percentage there on natural stat trick. Those guys are at the, the bottom for this team, and there's a healthy gap between them and anybody else. And so I think there's room for critique to go around when it comes to the two of them, and certainly having them both out there together can lead to some really tough situations to watch. So I will say that, yes, Berkey has done a good job of being able to get chances this year at certain times. He has struggled to do so at other times. I don't know what's going on with him. I think he's just kind of got the curse of, Kraken player who this year is just not allowed to score. That seems to happen every year to somebody. I think there's elements of that. I think there's elements to him playing a little bit differently than if you were to go back and look at his Colorado tape, just because of all the injuries that he's suffered. And I think there's an element of that, that crept into his game. And if you ask anybody who has worked in sports, it just absolutely kills you, right, when that happens, because your productivity is going to drop off, because you are not going to do all of those little things that you need to do to be, as good as you can be out there. And when you're playing at the highest level, you need to do all of those little things if you want to be able to produce, if you want to be able to score in this instance. And I think, and I do wonder if that has been a case, some of the case for him. That being said, like, Chandler Stevenson, I just, again, like, there's a lot of metrics that you could sort league wide, and he is at the bottom, right? Like just legit the worst forward for. And I think, that has not helped Berkey either. And I don't know that you can say that Berkey has necessarily contributed to that. I think that's just something that he's got to own himself.
Right. And one of them is also kind of just more relied upon really than the other, which again, I guess is not entirely his fault. That's the people who are putting him in those situations, but still, it is an issue. And also just when you talked about the little things with Burakovsky, since the Colorado days, right? And as Steph pointing out, Berkey's play being so different from what the rest of the team is trying to do is really starting to stick out, because just given the team's new identity, he just doesn't really fit. Super chat here from Schultz. Any chance Gord does an Ebbs and re-signs? In short, I think it's very unlikely. I would be shocked to see it, and shocked and kind of disappointed to see it, because, as Ricky's saying, they need to get away from re-signing 30-plus-year-old players. I agree, but we just talked about it on the podcast today, right? We kind of feel like Yanni Gord's skill set is being wasted in Seattle right now.
Yeah, I mean, he has. I feel like he still has a lot that he can give. He's probably still got some left in the tank. And if you're him, I don't know why you wouldn't want to go out there and try to make something happen with it. Certainly for the second half of this year, right? Because I get it. It's tough. He's a family man, got 2 young kids, very entrenched here as far as, his family and everything. The idea of uprooting them and moving somewhere else for a couple of years and all of that might be daunting, right? And I very much understand that. But certainly for the second half of this year, when you're going to be talking about, if you wait until early March to trade him, you're talking about 3-4 months max, right? To go on a run and have a chance to win another Stanley Cup. I feel like that's something, just about any player should be able to get on board with. And that's really kind of what kept, I feel like, Jordan Eberle here last year, was like, he really kind of wanted to commit to here last year. He didn't want to kind of try to go and do that mercenary thing. I feel like Yanni Gord has more in him, and he hasn't been able to do it. And I got to think that he's itching to go somewhere and play competitive hockey again, because that's just his brand and that's his style. And if I'm him, I would want to do that. And then once you've made that initial leap where you have been gone for a couple months and all of that stuff, guys tend not to come back after that.
It's true. They do tend not to come back. But I mean, it's always something you can then just reevaluate at that time. But
It is.
you're right. I think that's the case. And just given what Yanni Gord is right now, I think he's a lot more valuable to a playoff team than to a team that's, right now in the NHL in the bottom five. And he's such a competitive guy too. Again, I don't know him personally. I can't claim to get inside his head, right? But just seeing the way he is day in and day out, you got to think that he wants to play playoff games. He wants
Yeah.
to play at the highest level and try and go win another cup.
I mean, every player should, but especially a guy like him, where his style and all of the things that he does are just worth so much more come playoff time. Yeah, it's got to be frustrating for him, I would assume.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. Back to chat here. Don't worry, Ron will be trading Stevenson and Burakovsky for Pettersson any minute now. Would certainly take that. And then I know there's some talk about Joey being out. I think Cinnamon Toast Crunch was asking about that, but yeah, he's injured right now. Like, would be good to see Joey play soon, and hopefully he can return soon. But I mean, as far as this game, like, I don't think he improves outcomes. Philip Grubauer was great in this one.
Yeah, Grube was huge. He kept them in it at the beginning, right? Kraken, again, did not start on time, but boy, they found their game about 10 minutes into it, and they were able to really salvage the first period. They were able to tie up the game and tie up things in terms of shots on goal, which they were just getting devastated in prior to that. And Grubauer had to really stand on his head. He had to make some big, significant saves there at the beginning just to keep his team in it. And that's really been the story of these last, I don't know, handful of games, really this whole homestand, has been Philip Grubauer keeping the team in it, giving them a chance to go out there and do their thing. It was just tonight, the other goaltender was not going to let the Kraken get back into it late there in the third period with just three remarkable saves, three of the probably top 10 saves we've seen in this building this year, all in one period by one guy. You're not going to run into that every game, but the Kraken did tonight. That's certainly not Grubauer's fault.
Yeah, it was nuts. We talked about, I mean, that was pretty much the first 10 minutes was just the Jacob Markstrom show and talking about how great he did.
All anybody downstairs could talk about.
Yeah, fantastic game from him. Super chat here from Paul. So ready to hit the trade button and say goodbye to Yanni and Tanev. Can we bury Chandler Stevenson on the fourth line and play the kids at that point? I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it will happen. I mean, at that point, right? If we're talking February, March, if things continue like this, I would honestly, I would just do that at that point. I can't see the team possibly doing that, but I would.
Like I said, I think once the team is either officially out of it or they have done that sell-off and kind of signaled that they're out of it, I think that's when you start to see a change in the ice time distribution. Is it going to be to the levels that we probably want? Maybe not, right? Like, I don't want to set expectations there, but that is traditionally when we would see something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Environ says apparently Stevenson has dragged his 5-on-5 goals for percentage above 40%. Expected goals, on the other hand, is a different story. But
yeah, I was going to say the actual goals for versus the expected. I could believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. And James saying the sooner you start selling, the more the players you're giving up are worth, the more you get back, and the more the young guys get to start more time. The young guys get to start playing elevated minutes. On the first couple points, I'm actually not sure that is the case. It can be. If there are teams that are desperate out there and that want to make a deal, that absolutely can be the case. If you sell early, you can get more, but it's not always the case. And part of that is the way that the salary cap works, where it's calculated day by day. And so any acquiring team, the longer that they have the acquired player for, the more cap room and cushion they'll need to have to be able to acquire those guys. So waiting till the day of the deadline gives you more buyers because it has more teams that have more flexibility, right? Also, you can't be in a position as a GM where you're desperate to sell, right? Where you feel pressured to make that move right away, because then you don't have the leverage. You kind of have to set your price, and if a team meets it early, all the better. Then you sell and you make the trade, but you have to be at least willing to hang on to those guys till the deadline, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's also tough it depends on the types of players, right? I feel like if you have players that are going to really help down the stretch in the regular season, I think teams are more likely to kind of go out there and spend what they need to spend to bring those guys in right away as soon as possible. For a player like Yanni Gord, especially, where the real benefits you're getting from him are going to come playoff time, you don't need to be in a rush to go out and acquire Yanni Gourde. You can really kind of take your time and look around the league and make sure that that is the deal that you want to do, or that that is the best deal for you. And then you can go ahead and pull that trigger. And so that tells me that would take a little bit longer. And I think the same can be said of a Brandon Tanev. I don't know that Brandon Tanev being added to a team a month sooner than, or, a couple weeks sooner, really helps you as far as trying to, figure out where you're going to slot in as far as the playoffs go. That, and these days, I don't think teams really care about seeding that much either, right? Like maybe the very few teams up at the top, right? You want to be, if you really think you're going to go to the conference finals, you want to maybe try to get home ice for that or something. But home ice advantage is basically non-existent these days in the NHL. Seeding doesn't really seem to matter as far as teams being able to go on a run from anywhere in the playoff, outlook. And so, if you're a playoff team, why rush on some guys that are just going to be hanging out in your bottom, six, realistically, probably on your fourth line? Why spend those assets when maybe you want to save them and see if you can get somebody that's going to be even more impactful for you? So I think if they get traded in February, it is just because that's when Ron Francis does his business. And so there's an element of that, but I could also see it taking longer just because of the types of players we're talking about.
Right. And you want to make sure that you kind of, if there's a bidding war, especially for a guy like Yanni Gourde, you want to kind of set that up and let that run its course. Now, this one here from Kyle. RJ, can you help me understand the logic of not messing with Chandler's line? The other three lines working puts us, let's see. The current three lines that work have us somehow losing, but not tanking. And I understand being in this position, right, where you're losing enough, you're not going to make the playoffs, like as it is, as the lines are right now, right? You're not going to win enough games to kind of get back into things or go on a run, but not lose enough. But I think you want to see, at least for the Matty Beniers line, I still advocate not messing with that because of, again, so what's so important is the young guys developing, right? The young guys growing and becoming the best versions that they can be of themselves. And Matty Beniers with Jaden Schwartz at Capo Caco, that is helping him to that end. Shane Wright with Bjorkstrand and Tolvanen, that is helping him to that end. And so that is even more important, I think, than having the ideal draft position in this upcoming draft, is making sure that those two guys are supported well. And unfortunately, it leaves that other line that doesn't really work. And it'd be great to be able to kind of mess with it around the sides and see what you can do. But I still don't want to mess with the other two lines. So I guess that's the logic that I'm thinking about. But do you disagree, Dylan?
No, I totally agree.
Okay. Let's see, as I'll go down more toward the bottom of chat here. Let's see. I mean, staff asking, assuming we trade Yanni and Tanev, is there a player we could add that would solve the Stevenson problem? Sounds like the only solution involves removing Stevenson in some way. But I guess what type of player, like if you're, I mean, heck, you even look at the Kraken in year one and they sell off at the deadline, but they bring in a Daniel Sprong, somebody who kind of helped a little bit down the stretch, right? Is there a type of player that you could see, maybe, or even getting someone cheaply that you'd like to see, at least try with a Stevenson?
I'm really thinking about it because look, I think you could salvage Stevenson on the offensive side, right? I think there are players you could put with him there. Him having a Capo Caco-like player in the offensive zone, or maybe even more of a traditional power forward type who can really, get the puck at an angle and then drive the net with the puck, right? Somebody that Stevenson can set up in that way. Or maybe like a Jaden Schwartz. Well, no, because I mean, we haven't really even seen him set up backdoor plays that much this year. Like he played with Jaden Schwartz plenty, and that never developed really. So that doesn't even work. I don't know. I think finding, I guess the best thing I could think of would be finding somebody who Chandler Stevenson can get the puck to relatively easily, and then they're going to kind of do that last final big push and take over things in that regard, I guess. I don't know that you could find anybody defensively because, look, I would have said Jared McCann because Jared McCann has in the past with this team taken over center defensive responsibilities from the wing. I'm assuming if that was going to be on the table with Chandler Stevenson, we would have seen it by now. And we haven't, right? Or There's been a few times where we have, when it's been like kind of deep on Jared McCann's side, he's kind of taken the D1 approach and dropped down low, and then Chandler Stevenson has played higher up on the wall. That's a little bit what happened tonight, by the way, actually, was on the other side of the ice with him, where it was on Berkey's side, and Chandler Stevenson went and played the the F2, excuse me, spot defensively, and he just turned it over, right? Like, he still didn't make a play there. So even just taking him out of the middle defensively doesn't really seem to be helping you all that much. So all of the things that I would traditionally think to try for a player who struggles in the middle of the ice, both offensively and defensively, the Kraken have kind of tried already, and we haven't seen it work, right? We haven't seen it get him going. We haven't seen anything change for him. And so I'm running out of ideas, and you guys know me. I can get creative and really try to think of everything possible, and I can just not think of anything at this point.
What about if we give him rollerblades? If we have him playing roller hockey?
Man, you know what? Like, does it still count against the cap?
Oh yeah, well there you go.
Maybe the NHL creates a pro beach hockey league like they had in the '90s, and he's playing in it. Does he still count against the cap?
Yeah, that's the kind of creative thinking we might have to do. As we do have the super chat from Michael. This is payment for my past support of Stevenson, but I'm tired of what looks like a serious lack of effort to defend, and sometimes getting off the ice, he takes his time and puts us under pressure. I'm starting to notice it a little bit more. Earlier on in the season, despite the bad plays, right, I couldn't question the effort whatsoever. He was still hustling. He was still giving full effort all the time. He just, he is who he is as a player, right? In this one, though, and especially on that first goal for New Jersey, right, he turns the puck over in a bad spot, and that's kind of bad as it is, right? But when you do that, there are still things you can do to kind of hustle and get back in position. And especially, I mean, for some of the players on this team, I think like a Jared McCann or a Yanni Gore, those guys, that's when they're skating the hardest and when they're hustling the most, is when they do make a mistake and they turn a puck over, and you have to go make that right. And a lot of players will feel motivated by that. And on that play, I mean, Dylan, we were watching it happen. It felt like it was in slow motion because we were kind of narrating it to each other on the press bridge. I'm like, oh, that's a bad turnover. It looked a little lazy getting back to the slot to try and defend. And he really was kind of nowhere to be found helping. And I'm starting to see that stuff a little bit more with him.
Yeah. And, I guess to give him throw him a little bit, it was a long shift, but if, your team has been stuck in the defensive zone for a while like that, and you finally gain possession and then you cough it up, you got to make it look good, right? Like that's the bare minimum. If you can't make it right, you at least got to make it look good. And he did not
move your legs as fast as you can. It doesn't matter where you get to or what happens.
You go and you just body somebody up, right? Like you try to make it look like you tried to make up for that in some way, right? And it doesn't matter how tired you are. Like you're a professional athlete, right? Like this is your job. That's just what you've got to do. Did not happen on that play.
No, it didn't. So I hope that doesn't become more of a trend, but it is something that I've noticed. And then I see more discussion here. I mean, this one from Kylie. Are we still being unrealistic based on NHL expansion team history to expect 2 playoff runs in 4 years? Historically, haven't NHL expansion teams been awful for a while? And I see Cinnamon Toast Crunch kind of following up on that with a question. Is it difficult to judge success when we're such a young team with no history to compare it to? Meaning, like, for example, if this is our level, or are we better than this? And I think there is an element of that, certainly after last season, right? Where, okay, you just had a playoff run where you were 1 game away from the conference final. You have another season then where you're an 80-point team. You have basically a 60-point season, a 100-point season, and an 80-point season. What are you really?
Yeah.
And I think there is that difficult, question, right? But I think this season is kind of showing us that playoff run looked like much more the anomaly than last season or even year 1. This team feels kind of closer to last season's results. Certainly the point pace they are. And so I think for the Kraken, that we're kind of figuring that out. As for previous expansion teams, I'm sorry to kind of talk for so long on this, Dylan. I will let you get a word, and I just have such strong opinions on this. There really are only 2 legitimate examples. It's Vegas and Seattle, because everything prior to that had vastly different expansion rules, where the protection lists for teams, it was like 11 forwards and 7D. You were getting guys that were barely NHLers largely on those teams. And so you just started with a completely different situation. Also starting with a clean slate and, all the cap space, right? Those other situations were prior to the salary cap. And so cap space is a weapon. As we've seen through following the Kraken for 4 years, you can use cap space to your advantage. And so those other teams weren't able to do that because there was no salary cap at that time. And so, maybe for those later teams, right, the first few years, you could kind of get into using the salary cap a bit, but often those teams had some smaller budgets as well. So there really is no other comparison. I don't think it's the Vegas comparison. It's tough. I think it's a little unfair just because of the unique situation, right? And I see chats in here about how, they were given kind of gifts because nobody was really ready for an expansion draft like that. But I think it's even more unfair to compare it to previous expansion processes where you were getting basically AHL players and there was no cap space you could take advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, you go back and you look at some of those rosters for some of those expansion teams, right? Whether it's like, I think it's like San Jose, Anaheim, Columbus, and yeah, they are not getting NHL players, right? Like you get an NHL-ish goalie, and you got like maybe 2 or 3 guys just because they were coming from a team that was deep. But other than that, you were getting guys that by this point, year 4, we're not going to be on your roster anymore, because they just were not good enough to be playing in that league, right? Like that's how a lot of those teams were built. So you look at a lot of those early rosters, there's an insane amount of turnover in the first 2 or 3 seasons because you just don't get that, right? A lot of the way that those teams were built ended up being a little similar to this team in the sense that you got high draft picks because your team was awful. And then you built around those high draft picks. And so I think in that way, you can maybe look at things here and say, like, are we judging them too unfairly? I mean, they've got 2 top 4 picks in the, out here. And it's not like, they were taken this year, right? Like Matty Beniers is in, his D+4 season, right?
Yeah. Shane Wright, the younger of the two, is 21.
Right. So, there comes a point where I think you can start to fairly criticize, whatever it is you want to talk about, the state of where this team is. And you've had 4 off seasons in which you could spend money in free agency and potentially attract people here in a way that previous expansion teams did not have, right? Because, you mentioned the cap space thing. So that allowed the Kraken early on to have just more spending power so they could potentially outbid other teams for players. But you also had the fact that, again, you were not going to be just the absolute worst team in the league, the way those other teams were going to be for the first several years. So free agents just were not even going to consider them, right? Like nobody's looking to sign the first 2-3 years in Columbus because you're just going to be surrounded by nobody and you're just going to lose, 50 plus games. That was not really the case with Seattle. They had something that they could point to and say, look, we can be better. And so I think for those reasons, I think it is kind of fair to critique and criticize the state of this team because, again, it doesn't matter if you're an expansion team in year 4 or not. You're going to have the 3rd highest payroll, 4th highest payroll in the league. You should probably still be in it come late December. And this team wasn't.
Exactly. And Kylie kind of following up on this with a good question, though. So thanks, RJ. Great explanation. Do you think pandemic played a factor, though, compared to Vegas? There is no comparison to that. No, I mean, the pandemic is certainly unique. That is not something that has really happened before. But I think, if anything, that makes the situation more favorable for the Kraken because the way the pandemic was timed, right? It was right after the pandemic. And so you have this surprise flat salary cap environment where teams signed a bunch of contracts with the expectation that the cap would go way up. And all of a sudden it is flat for multiple years. And Seattle now has all the cap space you can possibly have. They're starting with a blank slate. You can really weaponize that cap space. And that's why I thought, look, they're not going to be able to do the same side deals as Vegas. Teams have learned their lesson there, but they can really hold teams over a barrel with their cap space and get massive assets to take on contracts the teams need to get rid of. And Ron Francis just didn't do it. I think the first trade he really made that weaponized cap space was the Bjorkstrand trade. a whole year after the expansion draft. And so I think if anything, the pandemic made things more favorable for the Kraken. They just didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think also where the pandemic actually hurt the Seattle process was Seattle, like I just said, right? They had those 2 top 4 picks. Pandemic wrecked prospects, right? And I've talked about this before on Deep Dive. Go look at like the 2022 draft class, right? That was the draft class that I feel like got impacted by the pandemic the most, because that was the year for them, if they were going to be playing major junior or in the USHL and the national team development program for the US. That was the year where they're supposed to like become legit players in those leagues, right? That was their first full season in those leagues. That was their chance to really cement themselves, learn what it takes, have arguably the most important development year of their careers. And it was just gone. And it did not exist for them. And I think that's why we've seen so many guys in that 2022 draft class struggle. And that's why we've seen, what is it, six guys, I think, in the top 15 that have already been traded because they just have not lived up to the expectations for where they were drafted. But I think we've just got to know that either their development was seriously pushed back by a couple of years, which I think is the case for most of these guys, or in other cases just irreparably harmed in a way that they are just never going to be as good as draft classes or players from draft classes that did not have to deal with that. And I think what we're starting to see now is draft classes that the pandemic didn't really affect them too much, right? They maybe lost a season of Bantam. That's nowhere near as impactful on your development as losing one of those 2 big key CHL years or USHL years. And Maddie, same thing, right? For that 2021 draft class, and a lot of those guys are kind of struggling too. And it's that top 10 looks like a real hit or miss board. They lost very prime development years they absolutely need for their bodies to develop, for their skill set to develop, for their understanding of the game to kind of take that next step forward by having those coaches, by starting to play in more NHL style systems, by starting to play really in systems at all. Okay, I used to scout Bantam. They have systems, but they are not anywhere close to the systems that are going to be run in major junior. And those guys just did not get it. It was just gone for them. And so I think there's an element of that also that kind of did hurt the Kraken. But again, that hurt everybody across the board. It's just for the Kraken, your 2 top 4 picks came from draft classes that lost arguably more than any of the other draft classes around.
Yeah, and that's it's a very good point too. I mean, that we'll never feel like it could be 15 years before we really know the full extent of what COVID did to the draft class and everything, and of course the Kraken will be affected by that. I see your super chat, Kraken fan. Just really want to get a couple things. It's okay, just on this conversation. Just because Kylie asking, I think we can answer quickly, right? Was also thinking the pandemic's impact on limiting player interactions, developing chemistry, and affecting the play of year one. Absolutely, there's no doubt it impacted that. Was a reason that they finished so poorly year one, but after year one, that goes out the window. It's been 3 years later.
Yeah.
And then Utah isn't really the best comp just because they all did. It's the same organization. They're just playing in a different spot, and that whole group has been together for a long time. So super chat here from Kraken fan. Thank you for your patience. Appreciate that. Are we looking at Francis being replaced? And it's not something I could see the Kraken really doing mid-season, just because they've never acted in a rash manner. So next to zero chance basically for me as well, as far as being replaced mid-season. This offseason, I think it's a different story. I think the expectation reasonably was to make the playoffs this year. And you put it so well, Dylan, right? If you have a top 3 highest payroll in the league and you can barely even have a full roster because you're so tight to the cap, and you get bottom 5 in the league results, it's incredibly rare in any pro sport that the GM will survive a situation like that.
Right, and especially when it's year 4, right? Like the one out for that is if you're inheriting that team, right? Like that's the one time you can get away with that. If it's year 4 for you and that's the scenario you found yourself in, ownership has given you the green light to spend as much as you possibly can, right? As much as you are legally allowed to spend, the Kraken have spent. And the results are what they are. I just think that that's one of those things that in sports you cannot survive as somebody in the front office, or at least not in your current position, right? We've talked about he might not get fired, but the situation changes a little bit. He won't be GM, that kind of stuff. That being said, every time I kind of bring this up with other people, RJ, that are maybe potentially a little bit more in the know than us, they kind of shrug off that idea. So I don't know. That's starting to make me wonder about it. But I got to go back and just default to my entire life watching sports. Whenever this scenario has played out, it does not end with the general manager still being the general manager that next season.
Yeah, and I lean back on that as well. I just, especially if they stay in the bottom five, I don't know. And Carl saying I think Francis might get bailed out by the injuries this year. They have had some injuries that have hurt, but it
Not
doesn't feel
enough.
like an exceptional amount of injuries. No,
No.
every team deals with injuries about the level the Kraken are dealing with this year. It's not some crazy amount. And yeah, there have been some good players that they've missed. But I mean, look at the Canucks who just came into this building, recently, right? The Kraken just played twice. They're missing Quinn Hughes, Philip Hronik, Elias Pettersson. I mean, I guess the Kraken equivalent would be missing Dunn, Montour, and I mean, they don't have a Pettersson at center. Dunn, Montour, and like
Maddie.
McCann or something,
Yeah.
right? Or Maddie. And yet the Canucks are finding ways to still get points. Like teams do get those injuries, they do overcome them. Yeah, the Kraken just haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry, Steven, I'm sorry about your super chat here that went because it was I missed it because it didn't have the text on. I'm so sorry, Steve. Thank you for the super chat, Steve, and sent with no context. Just realized I haven't and love the content and community. Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate that. Again, sorry I missed that as kind of the chat went further down. But thank you so much for the super chat. We really do appreciate it.
Definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. And then thank you for reminding us, Steve. Again, sorry you had to do that. Strategic time to bring in Brian Burke. I mean, he was here yesterday. I don't know if he's still in town for the PWHL game. How would you feel about that one, Dylan?
This would be interesting press conferences. I would say that. I don't know. I think Berkey's days in the front office are done.
Yeah, I would think so. I think he doesn't really want any more of that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh yeah, I mean, Jay say they don't have that caliber of player to get hurt. That is true as well. But and then also Riley, yeah, go back and watch the start of this post game. Just go watch it back, and you'll be satisfied with that. And thank you there, Steve. For you guys are the best. Appreciate that. Fusion Mix. If Stevie gets us one of Schaefer, McQueen, Martone, Higgins, etc., he's automatic MVP of this very silly season. And that is something I think we plan on getting into, maybe next week on the deep dive. That top five. And we had a little conversation about it before recording today. Of course, we were doing the mid-season player review, so we didn't really have time for it. But there are some potentially exciting players in the draft this year.
There are. It's just, so I just didn't want to have to do that. It's been brutal.
It's January. I believe I did not want to have to do this in January. So it's an unfortunate. I guess we'll have a lot of season left to potentially have that conversation. I don't want to rush into it, but at least if things do keep going this way, there are some good players there. And then Carl asking, does a top 5 draft pick even fix this team? Though it doesn't fix the team. No. There's only really there has to be like a Macklin Celebrini level guy to even then doesn't fully fix it. Look at the Sharks; they're below the Kraken in the standings, right? But it could help a lot.
I was gonna say a couple of things happened, right? And this is like here's my armchair GM rant, okay? Because you get to do this all the time on the Patreon.
Go for it.
And I don't. This is what it essentially allows you to do. It allows you to use both your buyout slots, go out, buy out Grubauer, buy out Andre Burakovsky. Yeah, it's brutal to have those buyouts on the books these next couple of years, but you could make up for it by having whoever you pick in the top 5, assuming it's not Schaefer. I think Schaefer needs another year, but the rest of those guys you could probably slot in. Certainly like a Porter Martone could slot in this year, or Eklund's tiny. He's old enough, but he's tiny, so maybe not him. But you could potentially slot in if you get like a Higgins or whatever, Porter Martone. You can slot them in next year on an ELC. Use the 3 years of their ELC to help deal with the fact that you've got the dead money on your cap from those 2 contracts. You also bring up Berkeley Catton because he's learning nothing in the CHL. If he doesn't want to go the NCAA route, you might as well have him with the Kraken. You might as well go all future mode, right? And let him and whoever you pick in the top 5 develop together, right? You don't want to necessarily have to give offset those guys so that every year you've got a player in your lineup that you've got to be giving like 13 to 15 minutes a night to, but they're a rookie and blah, blah, blah. No, just go ahead and kitchen sink it. Get both those guys in there. They're on their ELCs. That opens up as much cap space as this team can have available to them. And then sign somebody that's not like Chandler Stevenson.
Yeah, that's the key, is going out and signing the right player to kind of complement those guys. And Fusion Mix, I would lose my mind if we got Martone to play with Rakoff. That would be pretty cool.
That would be wonderful, right? And you're going to potentially have Yanni Newman pushing for an NHL spot next year, or a Jagger Furcus, right? The guys that have been successful down in Coachella Valley, Edward Chalet. You're just going to have to, I think, at some point with this group, if you really do need to change the core, which it very much feels like they have to, you're going to have to buy some guys out. You're going to have to deal with the cap crunch. And the way around that is to go ahead and utilize all of these assets that you've been developing that are going to be on entry-level contracts and going to be costing you just not that much money. And you're just going to have to go for it. Now, you're not going to be a good team if you do that next year. If you got like 3 guys on ELCs playing for you next year, you're not going to be a playoff team. But you're going to have a lot more optimism around the group. You're going to have highlights, and it will at least feel understandable to the fan base because, hey, look, it's a young rebuilding team. Look at all these rookies that are out there playing, and we get to watch them get better over the course of the season, rather than, hey, look at this team that went out and made these big, exciting free agency moves, and they're now available on all the local networks and all of this stuff, and they can go to the playoffs because they did it just the year before last, and blah, blah, blah. You're just not going to have that set up, and so everything will feel better, right? So much of this is just the expectation for this year that the organization themselves set, by the way. Like, it wasn't like we thrust this upon them. They said that was the standard for them. They haven't met that standard at all. If next year your standard is just getting a bunch of guys playing time at the NHL level, everybody just gets to have a better time. Oh, yeah, and lower ticket prices to match that.
Yeah, that is true. And I see some people like Lindsay getting on board. Dylan just gave me hope with that strategy. Future staff watching rookies get better is very exciting to me. Ricky, you can sell youth, can't sell mediocre. I think
exactly.
There's truth to that for sure. I mean, if there is, young players and hope, right, you can sell that. And then on the Francis thing, I see. Where is it? I see Steve saying, a new GM will maybe trade away all the youth for aging vets who can score. I don't know that I think with the new GM, generally they have a little bit of time and flexibility to make some moves. And I think ownership, I would think they should realize that this is not a quick fix, given, it's not a one-off season fix for this team, given where they're at. Certainly not if they finish in the bottom 5 again. It's just not that quick of a fix. So you kind of need to give the new GM a little bit of time. And maybe you do trade 1 or 2 prospects for a newer member of the core. Yeah. I think that's okay. You have a prospect pool where you can afford to do that. And so I'm on board with that. And then Jeffrey saying, I will say the best teams and organizations, not just the NHL, but sports in general, are the ones that don't make rash decisions and quick firings. Teams that fire coaches every year are not better off. And I do agree with you there, Jeffrey. I think that is a general trend in sports, but Ron Francis, I mean, he is the 9th longest tenured GM in the NHL right now. And even if you just go to when the Kraken actually started making moves, because he was hired well in advance of the team starting, still in the top half of the league. So it's not like, it would be a quick rash firing like he hasn't had time. There still is a fair amount of time he's had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. No. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, again, all along, right? 3 to 5 year plan, right? They wanted to be competitive by year 5. Next year will be year 5. If they're going to have to run it back with this group, which it kind of seems like they might have to, I don't see how you're going to be competitive year 5. You might as well go ahead and start shifting things and the expectations at that point. And you can say, look, 4 years was a lot of runway. There's a lot of other teams and organizations that would not give somebody that much runway. It just didn't work out, and we have to start over.
Right. And Viren asking, wouldn't the entire reason to fire Francis be we didn't make the playoffs? We want to make the playoffs. It's beyond that. It's that we didn't make the playoffs. We see no indication that we could even be a playoff team next year. And then also you look at the greater situation. And I mean, I know the Athletic is just, one source or whatever, but they did a ranking of every team's contract situation, right? And the build that they've built in the Kraken, I think we're in like the bottom 3 in the league. Just about everybody who opines on these things say the Kraken have one of the worst salary setups in the entire NHL. you look at that body of work from Ron Francis, no matter how good the prospect pool is, and you just say, this isn't acceptable. We need somebody else running the show.
Yeah, no, this anybody who's hired will not have the same expectations that Ron Francis had, right? Because Ron Francis was able to build to this, right? So like the expectations accelerate with that. I do believe in this ownership group. I do think this is a smart ownership group. They're not going to make rash decisions. They are one to very much understand the context around everything. I think they understand that, yes, you know, they got built into a corner right now, and that it will take a little bit of time to get out of that corner. I think anybody coming in over this offseason, the expectations would be very different for them versus if they decide to keep Ron for year 5 and try to see out that plan.
Exactly. And so as we're over the hour mark here and getting into some bigger, conversation topics, maybe not the best for post game, or we don't have another hour to talk about it, even though we certainly could, we'll kind of close it out for this edition of ECH Post Game Live. The Kraken's next game is on Thursday, I believe, right, against the Columbus Blue Jackets as they go on the road to start this road trip. And of course, the Kraken going on the road. Why not watch those games at Queen Anne Beer Hall, get that fun home atmosphere? It's the next best thing you can have to sitting here in the arena. They've even got the goal light and the goal horn and everything. So check out those road games at Queen Anne Beer Hall. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this ECH Post Game Live, and we will see you after that Columbus game.